to log on, and then we'll get started.
I've always wondered how this worked with people being able to, like, you know, participate, but not in the call.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yep. So for everyone who's joined, we're just going to give people another couple of minutes before we get started.
Oh yeah, see some familiar names.
I know. I see. We had Mike Fisher tell his students about something recently, and so I've gotten so many emails, and I'm like, okay, we need to do that with Tech Talk for sure.
Yes, I thought you were about to say Mike Fisher did one of these. How did I miss that? But yeah, Mike is good at spreading the word, and so that's definitely a good resource.
Yeah. All right. It's just a little bit past noon. We will go ahead. Well, now, okay, lots of people are hopping on right this minute, so we'll give one more minute and then we'll get started.
How it usually goes.
And we are recording this, just so you know. I think everybody got a little note to that effect. We record these to be able to let people who couldn't make it watch. And so I think let's go ahead and get started now. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And, you know, we're here for the Pediatric Innovation Network Tech Talk. We do these 4 times a year, so we'd love to have you join any and all that we do. So this month, or this session, is with Sarah Jo Tucker, and she is going to be talking about pediatric device design and development, and also the expanded access pathway for approval of devices. And so, Sarah Jo, can you introduce yourself to everybody?
So as mentioned, I'm Sarah Jo Tucker. I am a research engineer at the Global Center for Medical Innovation, also known as, or most known as GCMI. And I've been at Georgia Tech for 7 years total. So I was in the Department of Biomedical Engineering under Professor Scott Hollister for 5 years. And then I transferred over to GCMI for the past 2 years now, which is a crazy thing. And so if any of you are unfamiliar with GCMI, so GCMI is an affiliate of Georgia Tech, and we do medical device product development consulting. And so as an affiliate, we have the ability to work with both Georgia Tech faculty, really any academic faculty, and industry as well. And so we, you know, I would say our services, you know, again, from a whole perspective, medical device product development is what I would describe, but we do a number of things from, you know, the feasibility portion of medical device development, you know, up until commercialization, all the way through, and a bunch of little things as well, depending on the need of, you know, who we're collaborating with and the needs of our clients. And so, you know, with faculty, that looks, you know, can look a lot different than what industry needs. And so that can be, you know, a feasibility analysis, prototyping, pre-sub applications, you know, consulting for those items, clinical trial support, design history file, just everything under the sun for design and development for medical devices. And so, you know, what I love about GCMI and what we've been able to do here, especially with faculty, I like to highlight the faculty portion, just because I've worked with a lot of faculty coming from BME and working under faculty member. But I mean, the research we work on at Georgia Tech is incredible. And obviously we're going to talk about that a lot here. But translating that research is the most fulfilling portion, of what we're all, our end goal, right? And so being a part of that translation of, all of these amazing technologies is extremely exciting. And, we love being a resource for Georgia Tech and, any others. And so that's a little bit about me and in regards to what I've done. And really my focus when I was in BME was focusing on pediatric devices. That's a primary focus for Professor Hollister, primarily the tracheal splint. So I'm sure many have heard of the tracheal splint, or also airway support device. And I'll just dive into what that is. But so the tracheal splint, and again, high level, is, if you can imagine, it's intended for pediatric patients with moderate to severe tracheomalacia. And so the way I describe tracheomalacia is simply, we all know our trachea is rigid, and we have our cartilaginous rings. Imagining being, not having that rigidity and your airway collapsing during exhalation, therefore suffocating. And so this device was created by Dr. Hollister back when he was at University of Michigan, and it is truly a splint. It goes around the airway and it's sutured to the airway. It's made of polycaprolactone, so it's resorbable, and it holds the airway open as well as can grow with the patient. Again, this is intended for pediatrics, so it is, the reason it's resorbable is so that it can grow. Typically, the patients are under a year old, so they grow a lot when they receive the device. So that was my primary focus when I was under Dr. Hollister at BME, and also that's one of my main projects of being at GCMI, is focusing on the product development for commercialization of that device. I think that encapsulates most of it.
Definitely it does. And so one thing that I want to ask is, in doing this process, working with the splint, working with companies that bring you other things, all of the tasks that GCMI does, what are some things that innovators should be aware of when they're building medical devices?
I think there's a long list for that, but I would say, some of the top items that, just advice-wise, I would give anyone is, one, if it's not documented, it doesn't count. So, you can have accomplished a tremendous amount of milestones, et cetera, but if you don't have good documentation and good practices for that documentation, then it really means nothing. Word of mouth and what you describe and everything that you could have done, you really should have formal processes within a quality management system that outlines and can be traced with everything you've done, so that, because that's one of the most important aspects of when you're, looking to commercialize your medical device. That's what the FDA is going to want to see. They're going to want to see all the documentation and how things can be traced, et cetera. That's one of my biggest recommendations, because a lot of what I've seen when it comes to research and development for medical devices and preliminary testing, et cetera, is, you can go pretty far with a device and have the expectation that it's ready to be commercialized. And then you hit this stop where you kind of have to go all the way back to square one and redo everything that you need, you may have already done, because, you weren't working under a quality management system or under formal processes, et cetera. And so, that's obviously what we do at GCMI. And the way I describe it, and I've learned this over time, is, being a product development engineer, that's kind of our subject matter expertise. And then, say, the researcher or startup company who has this device, that's their, there's the subject matter expert of that device. And when you bring those two together, you get a really great end result. And so that, ultimately that's really one of my biggest recommendations. Then of course it's networking and engaging with others that have been experienced with commercializing similar devices, potentially engaging with the FDA, even if it's just listening to talks and things of that nature, and kind of trying to get connected with who may be very valuable within your product development process, and especially, engage with a regulatory consultant from the get-go, because that can also throw you through a loop, identifying your regulatory process and your predicate device and things like that. And even if they're initial conversations, that still gives you the context of, what your future may be. So
yeah. All right. So that's good. So the networking piece, that's something that GCMI can help you with.
Absolutely.
And I can help some too. If people reach out to me, we help make those connections for everybody. And I was going to encourage people, if you have a question, put it in the chat and we will answer it while we're on here today. So feel free to do that. If there's something that you don't understand or, sparked a question, put it in the chat. It'll be great. So can you tell us more about the tracheal splint? Because there probably are some people online who have not heard of it before.
Yes.
And so maybe give a little rundown of that.
Yes. So as mentioned, it's a pediatric device. It's intended for patients typically, I would say, under a year old. Pediatrics is that broad 21 and under. But the patients who have received it have been under a year old. With it's made out of a resorbable material, polycaprolactone, which is a very common plastic used in medical devices, and it's 3D printed and patient specific. So typically the process is, receiving imaging for these patients, and that imaging being segmented and the device being developed solely around their malasic airway. And that looks different for every patient with tracheomalacia. So, that's different, obviously, depending on age, that's different outer diameters, that's different lengths. And so this is all done, on a case-by-case basis. So again, with their malasic airway, it's a floppy airway, and the splint is designed with suture holes all around it. I was going to have one with me, but I don't. And it's sutured around the airway, holding it open. And so as it is a resorbable material, it resorbs over time. That, pinpointed time is not fully identified yet. I will say Scott Hollister, he started doing this, I believe it was the first patient who received one of these devices was 10 years ago. And so, that's a long time for a patient to have one of these resorbable devices where, 10 years of data is incredible for in human use, right? And so we've done about 7 with Scott at Georgia Tech, with GCMI. I believe 5 have been in collaboration with CHOA, and we had one with Penn State, one with Johns Hopkins. And ultimately, the way this happens from an FDA standpoint is it's called Expanded Access, which is also known as compassionate use. Some may know it as compassionate use better. The way I also describe this is, so typically people think about the typical commercialization pathways, the 510Ks, PMAs, and expanded access is over there. You have those over class 1, class 2, class 3, and those pathways, and then expanded access is separate from that. So expanded access is a case-by-case basis. It can be for medical device, biologic, and drug. And obviously in this case, it's a medical device that is approved by the FDA for a patient with a life-threatening condition where ultimately all other options for that condition are exhausted. And so, a good bit of documentation is required for this as well, which Dr. Hollister has mastered with, our collaborators, like at CHOA, Dr. Kevin Marr and Steve Gowdy. And you have this whole document basically justifying the risk-benefit scenario of why the benefits outweigh the risk for this investigational device that is not within a clinical trial, it's not commercialized, et cetera. And so ultimately, when it gets approved, that's when you can move forward. And so the way it works with Georgia Tech and GCMI is GCMI also has the ability as an affiliate of Georgia Tech to be the manufacturer of record for devices. So in this instance, we collaborate, in this case, it's a bit different than, the typical design history file documentation, but we, do the necessary documentation for this expanded access case within our quality management system. And this process includes a number of things between the collaboration. We have obviously the manufacturing of the devices, the inspection of the devices, the testing of the devices, the sterilization of the devices. It's a really big process with a lot of effort from a number of people. And so, when it does get to the point where we receive the approval from the FDA for this case, we have the devices and the surgery is scheduled, and it does get implanted into these children. It's a celebration. You can't ask for anything better than that when I think our last patient done at CHOA was last November, and the patient had never been extubated, so he'd been on a ventilator his entire life, which was, I think at the time he received it, I don't know exactly, but it had been months that he had been, in a hospital bed on a ventilator. He had never been held. And so when he received his device, a week later, he was extubated, and he was held after that. And that's what it's all about, right? That's the result that, wow, all of this effort, time, and energy, and being able to utilize the expanded access pathway for this purpose, it's a beautiful thing. So
yeah. I want to touch on why a resorbable is important. It's because when you're tiny, right, you're going to grow a lot between being born and even age 3, right? And so it's really important for that material to not stick around and restrict continued growth.
Exactly.
But to be able to absorb, and that way they don't have to go back in and take anything out. It makes it really usable and work for this exact purpose.
Absolutely.
So I think that's the kind of thing too. You have to think about all of the pieces of the puzzle. If you're building something, do you want to have the kid have a second surgery? Probably not, if you can help it, right?
Absolutely. Especially, this surgery is typically an open, chest surgery, and that's a very invasive surgery. And so you would not want a second surgery. And so, yes, for it being resorbable versus, oh my gosh, what's permanent? I'm like, what? Non-resorbable? Permanent. Obviously, it's going, and we're talking, inner diameters of 6 millimeters to, I would say 15, 16 millimeters. And that's really tiny. And, it goes all the way down to 6 or so, because these devices can be used on the trachea and then also the main stem bronchi. So if, you have a malastic segment on your trachea and then a malastic segment on your left bronchus, that can also receive this splint as well. And so a patient can receive up to, 3 of these splints at one time. And these are really small devices. And so, and again, the rapid growth at that age is tremendous. And so for a device like this, some of the most important aspects that we test, we want the airway to be protected and maintain its patency. That's the purpose of the device. And then allow for growth. So those are the 3 main aspects that, you have to have in order for it to be a successful device in these children. And so it's over time, there's been design changes, et cetera. And with Dr. Hollister now, we're in what we call our phase 2 of product development for product realization, which is we have our planning phase, which is phase 1 that we wrapped up last year, and then we're in phase 2, which is design and development, which at the end of this phase, we hope to hit a design freeze, meaning we have established our design, and this is the design we are moving forward to for design verification and validation. And so typically with the design of the device, again, it's a single structure. Most that's changed is wall thickness or suture hole arrangement. And so, that's changed over time depending on, it's very important to get the feedback from the user, which is the surgeons, specifically feedback on suturing and the suture hole arrangement and, what is best for them. And if that can also translate to passing the mechanical testing, how that affects the mechanical integrity of the device, et cetera. So it's a really cool process to have gone through and have the experience now looking back and saying, wow, that was very stressful at the time. But, once we continue going through it, it gets easier and easier over time, and you just gain that much more knowledge.
Yeah. And I'll say you touched on something that's really important and something we really try to focus on at Georgia Tech when we're looking at medical device development is making sure that clinician is involved in every step of the process because you have to make it work for them. And so that's a really key comment that you gave. Okay. So let's go back to expanded pathway for a second. So we know it's different because it's for a situation where there really is no other way to do it. The child is going to die if you don't do something. So we have something, even though it's not FDA approved. Can you add any more about how it's different than other pathways with the FDA?
So I would say, again, with the FDA has very established processes for commercializing devices, for clinical trials, for early feasibility studies. And there is I would say that's not very time sensitive. I would say one of the biggest changes differences for expanded access is we need this now or within the next few weeks. And, again, you still have to submit a pretty thorough justification of your device, what's been accomplished, your processes for all of the other things I mentioned, your testing, sterilization, et cetera. And, that's typically what sets it completely apart, because obviously with your clinical trials, you have a number of work to go prior to, getting the clinical trial started, and then you're recruiting your patients, et cetera. This is something, again, that's a little bit different about this condition as well. But so ideally, with commercializing this device, the device can be used also for other patients other than, moderate to severe tracheomalacia, if it still fits if the device still fits the criteria for maybe mild tracheomalacia. Really depends, again, case by case, but expanded access is, again, they can't live on a ventilator for, they could, but, that obviously comes with its caveats as well. And so that's the biggest difference, I would say, that the FDA offers for, utilizing these investigational devices outside of a commercialized device and a clinical trial. So that's really the intention for it.
Yeah. And so if you're thinking about people who are being innovative and building their own medical devices, and the groups that you've helped, and maybe some things you've experienced with the tracheal splint, what are some of the biggest obstacles that you've had to face?
I would say for example, for the splint and with expanded access, of course, cost is a huge obstacle, right? It's a lot of money to, manufacture the devices. It's a lot of time and energy from a number of personnel. Sterilization, you do a clinical batch release, you're utilizing a non-verified sterilization process. It's a lot of money that, you have to figure out how is this going to get paid for in order for, to save this child's life. That's a really big obstacle that I would say we have faced every single time going through this process. And I mean, that's a big obstacle in general for medical device development and for pediatrics. I mean, that's, it's like, with the patient population for, pediatric patients with moderate to severe tracheomalacia, it's very small. And so even commercializing the device, it's not very attractive from the business side because, you have a very small patient population. And so it's really, I would say, continuing to persevere and, again, connecting with the right people who have the right, the same motives you do. And that's what we find here a lot at Georgia Tech, and with GCMI being a part of Georgia Tech and CHOA. And that's something I love about Dr. Hollister. I mean, he cares about getting this device, to assist with saving a child's life. And he will go, through the expanded access pathway as many times as he possibly can before his device is commercialized, so that patients can, have the quality of life they deserve. And so I think aligning with, and that's the same with the clinicians who have the same motives as well. I mean, that's really some of the biggest obstacles. And I think everyone, runs into that, obviously, when you're looking to have a startup and things like that, and fund even a class 1 device. It's still going to cost you a lot of money to just commercialize for, your device. And so again, going back to the networking point that we both mentioned earlier, that's, just getting in the know of and I connect people all the time, and being on campus for as long as we have and whatnot, it's just growing that group that is passionate about, pediatrics and medical devices and saving lives, and just improving lives too, not just saving, improving lives. So hopefully that was a long answer, but.
No, that's good. So we only have a few minutes left, actually, and I was going to see if anybody has a question. Feel free to either put one in chat, or you can also unmute and ask. So does anyone have any questions for Sarah Jo? Do you do any work with GTRI?
Yes, we do. It just depends on what the collaboration is, what the PI at GTRI needs, and if we're able to offer those services. So it's really different. We've done some, most recently off the top of my head, for a project I've worked on, we've done some feasibility work for a PI at GTRI, and we did some collaborations with some classes that they were doing for high school students, et cetera. So yes, the answer is yes, we do. So,
and just for anyone who maybe doesn't know what GTRI is, so GTRI is the Georgia Tech Research Institute, and it is the applied research arm of Georgia Tech. So non-teaching faculty, they typically build things. So just to let everybody know, because not everybody here is from Georgia Tech. All right. Any other questions out there? And if not, I'm going to ask you one last question, which is there anything else you want to tell us about GCMI, or what you do, or advice for medical device developers? Anything I didn't ask you? Oh, I do see another question, though. Maybe we'll go. Give me a short answer for that, and then we'll answer Mike's.
Yep, I can answer both. So I would say something I really wanted to push on is in this meeting here is how much I've learned that teamwork, and as I mentioned, subject matter experts is critical. I would say what's brought so much, the most valuable aspect of our team for, say, the Splint is, we have our Hollister lab, we have our GCMI, we have our CHOA physicians, and we all are subject matter experts in something different. And that creates something, that's what's needed. And, so be open-minded and engage, again, with others. I love not knowing anything about a product, but being able to, analyze the risk and ask questions and go about those conversations where if you're the subject matter expert, like I was with the splint when I was, on the Hollister side, I would have never thought about those things. The questions that were asked to me from GCMI. And then Mike's question, what are the biggest gaps that need to be addressed to translate academic research and product development, lab notebooks and publications versus VHF? I would say the biggest gaps that need to be addressed, one, I think it all starts with the support of each other. I would say years ago, GCMI was kind of a distant group that we didn't really know much about, right? And our purpose is to support the faculty at Georgia Tech. And so kind of going along with what I said, utilizing the resources that we have to kind of help, the things that we do with documentation, it only facilitates what you're doing within your research. So what you're writing in your lab notebook can be, written in, a template form and whatnot, and create a lot of value as well at the same time. And so I think they both play a really important role with each other. And I think it's just the gap is that the disconnect, right? So, hopefully I've encouraged others to engage with GCMI, and, you can always email me or really anyone on our team. We're on campus too. So I would love to chat, and, those are our big goals are to help the researchers and faculty at Georgia Tech, get to where they want to be. And so, yeah.
All right. Well, good. Thank you so much for being here today and telling us about GCMI and the tracheal splint and giving some good advice. We will wrap up now, but be sure to check in for our next one. Christopher, do you have the date of our next one yet? You could put it in the chat for people. But yeah, we'll have another great talk in a few months and in the new year, but have a happy holiday to everybody. And again, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Leanne.
Uh-huh.
Bye.
Bye.